Okay, so I guess I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Susan Stutz, and I'm going to read my story, which is about my son, Patrick. And hi, Mom. It's called The World Went Red. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully some more people will show up. Okay? November 2015. In a bid to be hired for the highest office in the land and one of the most influential posts in the global community, presidential candidate Donald Trump mocked a disabled reporter for the New York Times, and Trump's supporters went wild with adulation. Blood rushed my brain, and the world went red. In that moment, for the first time, the election hit home. No more was the victim of ridicule out there in the indeterminate somewhere. The victim was seated on the couch across from me. He was my son, Patrick. I was beyond crazy with anger. July 29, 1993. One of the most path-altering days of my life. The colors, the smells, and emotions of that day are as vivid to me now as they were then. Heavily pregnant with my second child, I sat in the lounge of the birthing center, patiently waiting my turn for my weekly exam. I can see the gloss of the magazine pages, between my fingers as I read about how to be the perfect mom. I can feel the cushions on my back as I sat on the couch. I can feel the warmth of my daughter's body sitting next to me. The birthing center resembled a home more than a doctor's office. The antiseptics of a hospital room or traditional doctor's office were nowhere to be found. Live plants hung from the ceilings and sat on shelves. Expectant mothers gave birth in real beds with pillows and shams, in bedrooms you could actually envision living in. A dining room offered tables and chairs made of real wood, and I wore one of my favorite pregnancy outfits, a red floral printed Laura Ashley jumper, a white t-shirt with a Battenberg lace collar, lace socks, and white leather keds. My hair, which hung to my waist, was braided down my back. My husband Dan was there, as well as our daughter Jessica, who was 4 at the time. My pregnancy was a family affair, and everybody participated when and where possible. I was young and healthy, and I had no high risk factors. My pregnancy had been routine. I anticipated giving birth to a healthy baby within a week or so. The birthing center was running behind that morning because many of their mothers-to-be had delivered their precious cargo the night before, and virtually all of the birthing staff had been called in to assist. As a result, we waited almost 3 hours for our turn. Finally, they called my name, and off we went to an exam room. I assumed the position, my tummy was appropriately gelled, and we waited while the midwife located the heartbeat. It was there, then it wasn't, then it was again, but it was really slow. The wand circled my rounded stomach, first in one direction and then back in the other. I knew we were in trouble even before I saw the look in the midwife's eyes. The heartbeat was gone. My birthing center was in partnership with an OB/GYN practice located right behind the building. After several harrowing minutes, the door of the exam room opened, and in walked a doctor I had never seen before. He was so young, but his eyes were filled with compassion. He continued the wand work of trying to find the heartbeat, and being unsuccessful, decided I needed to be transported to the hospital across the street. Doc, who's been my physician since that day, some 23 years ago, told me afterwards that he had wanted to pick me up and carry me to the hospital, but that we'd had to wait for the ambulance. I was not at all prepared for this. I'd had no complications during the entire pregnancy, nor had I experienced any difficulty when I was pregnant with my daughter. There had been no sign of trouble, no forewarning. I was completely adrift, not able to process what was happening. Once we reached the emergency room, I was immediately wheeled into a surgical suite, and my dress was flung up over my stomach and chest. The anesthesiologist leaned in and said, "Time to go nighty-night," and the world went black. I awoke to find my dress in the same place it had been when I closed my eyes. I still had my shoes and socks on. Dan was sitting next to me crying. I had never seen him cry. In fact, that day was one of only 2 times I have witnessed him cry in more than 2 decades. The tears running down his face scared me like nothing else could. Dan realized I was awake and looked up at me. I asked about our baby, and he told me that we had a son and that he was in serious trouble. The world went black again. The next time I woke up, I found myself in a private room. My clothes had been changed, and I no longer wore my shoes and socks, or my favorite red jumper. I cannot say what happened to them, but I never saw those belongings again. I spent the next 3 days in the hospital, but our Patrick was transported to the neonatal unit of a hospital 45 minutes away. I saw nothing more than the heel of his foot before he left. I didn't know what he looked like, whether he had any hair, or how much he weighed. The painkillers had made me almost incoherent. However, I knew I must be lucid if I was to be released from the hospital and to see my son. My identical twin sister Paula did my hair, applied war paint to my face, and propped me up in a chair with every pillow she could find. Doc came in and I was momentarily brilliant. Paroled first time up. Now let me see my son. Dan and I made daily trips to the neonatal unit over the next 2 weeks, viewing Patrick through a plastic tent, reaching in and around wires, tubes, and lines to hold his hands in the enclosed crib, feeding him, singing and reading to him, all while trying to digest the knowledge that he might not survive. When Dan and I left the hospital each day, Paula would arrive. I couldn't be there with Patrick 24 hours a day, but she wanted Patrick to see his mother's face, my face, whenever he was awake. So while Dan and I took the day shift, Paula took the nights. For reasons that remain unknown to this day, Patrick had gotten into serious trouble in the womb. My C-section was performed in record time, but when Patrick was delivered, he was essentially stillborn. No heartbeat, no respiration, APGAR scores at 0 and 0. I learned much later that at the time, the protocol for CPR on a newborn delivered in Patrick's condition was no more than 6 minutes. Doc brought Patrick back at 5 minutes and 23 seconds. 37 seconds became the difference between life and death. It was only with hindsight I recognized that had my appointment taken place at the scheduled time, or had I decided not to wait, my son would likely not be here today. I do not recall how we got on their radar. However, almost immediately upon his release from the neonatal unit, the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services began monitoring Patrick. They offered us testing to determine the extent of his abilities and thus his challenges. This allowed our family the possibility to get in front of whatever he was sure to face. We knew from the onset that it was going to be an uphill battle, but we now had the resources to begin conquering the obstacles. Patrick was almost immediately diagnosed with microcephaly, which means that his head is smaller than it should be. His brain is not, and in turn, his brain is not as developed as it should be either. He began life with a deficiency of gray matter, which not only develops in utero, but continues to grow with you following birth. As a result of that deficiency, with the prolonged lack of oxygen, Patrick is both developmentally delayed and intellectually disabled. The various milestones of childhood came late to him. Holding up his own head, rolling over, and crawling seemed to take forever. Walking didn't come until he was well past a year old. Tasks such as toilet training took more than a year to accomplish as opposed to a few months. Patrick has had the benefit of occupational and physical therapy to deal with the incredibly high tone he has in his muscles. He's also had speech therapy to overcome the adverse effects of a submucous cleft palate, which was repaired when he was about 1, but had still adversely affected his speech patterns and ability to communicate properly. He was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 3 and began taking medication for it at that time. As a young child, he experienced separation anxiety to such an extent that he had to be within sight of me at all times, except when he was in school. As Patrick has grown older, his difficulties have become more pronounced. He does not read or write well, and his comprehension levels are very low. This means that everyday concepts that you and I find minimally challenging, such as putting a puzzle together or playing a board game, can be especially difficult for him to grasp. Socially, he's very awkward and has a difficult time with common social behaviors around those individuals with whom he is not very familiar. He suffers from chemical depression, and at age 23, he has the mental acuity of a very young teenager. Patrick does not and may never hold a job or live independently. Additionally, although not formally tested, he exhibits signs of being on the autism spectrum. Although he cannot remember how to spell simple words like the days of the week, he has an almost encyclopedic memory when it comes to sports, both professional and collegiate. He can give you the rundown on virtually any athlete's college or professional career. Given the right athlete, he can even tell you where they went to high school. He spends his nights and days glued to ESPN and SEC Network, and I happily pay a king's ransom for cable and internet so that he never misses a play. Over the course of Patrick's life, I was a permanent face at every preschool program, daycare, before and after program, and school that Patrick attended. I volunteered in classrooms, some of which were his, some of which were not. I knew by heart every educator's name and the rules of engagement for students with disabilities. I became friends with the exceptional student education professionals who were largely responsible for Patrick's day-to-day education. I became his most ardent supporter and his most visible and vocal advocate. I shouted the loudest in support of him. I attended every single meeting or function at both children's schools, regardless of their perceived importance. I signed off on every academic change or update to Patrick's education. I made sure that Patrick received each and every benefit that could be reaped from our public education system. My husband and I also did the work of parenting at home, making sure he always got his work done and in on time, and molding and shaping him to grow and become a valuable member of society. Being the parent of a person with intellectual disabilities has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. While Patrick grew from infancy to young adulthood, I became a better and stronger person, more than I would have been had I not been so fortunate to have him as my son. I learned to fight for him and for our family because of the lessons I learned being his mother. I learned to have greater compassion for those who do not have the same abilities as mine and to appreciate some of the smaller things in life. The year 2016. The 2016 election was the first that Patrick participated in. It thrilled me that his first political experience happened at the same time that we had our first female presidential candidate to be nominated by a major political party. Over the course of the election, Patrick and I talked a lot about the things Trump said about people with disabilities, immigrants, and women. We spoke often about how the world is filled with people of differing abilities, backgrounds, races, ethnicities, and sexual orientations, and how different does not equal wrong. We also talked about what we as humans have in common. We all love, laugh, face adversity, and have the capacity to grow and be quality individuals. Often these conversations were somewhat one-sided, as Patrick has difficulty articulating his thoughts. But on these occasions he listened. I know he did. And when it came time to cast his vote, he supported the candidate who held his interests close at heart. So this is my question. If my intellectually challenged son can recognize the inherent problems of a diatribe that ridicules differences and the people that support it, who then deserves to be the butt of a joke? My son is precious, unique, funny, humbling, and amazing. He will be no one's punchline. Say hi.
Hi.
And that's Patrick.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye.